Question?
That's an accident. Sorry, I forgot to lower it. Sorry about that.
No problem. So today we have a listen. I'm a big proponent of reading books. I'm old school like that. I feel like not many people are reading books nowadays, and that's why I assigned to you this book that's very close to home, the Take Care of Yourself book, which became the ethos of this class because it's about community and care at a time of great, whatever the world is going through. So there's another book that's very formative in a lot of my work, and another theorist and author, and I call him an artist, in my opinion, who's an amazing, you know, source of information and resource of critical thinking for artists such as myself and people that are surrounded by me and millions of other people around the world. And this author is Marshall McLuhan. When I was studying at Concordia, I was in the political science department for the first year and a half of my teaching, and then 9/11 happened. And when I went and joined the communication studies department, um, one of my teachers by the name of Dennis Murphy, God rest his soul, taught me a propaganda class. And adjacent to that propaganda class, he gave us Jack Eluel's book about propaganda. But the other book that he handed me personally, me and my friend Nofi, who was my producer at the time, he gave me The Medium is the Message. And that book was like smoking a joint. It was like the only way I could describe it was an experience. Like I had never experienced a book like that. I read comic books my whole life. I was reading all this really dense political stuff, and then in came this book when I was consuming mass amounts of media about my people getting murdered and killed and slaughtered and occupied, and it brought ease to my heart. It made me understand what was happening in my brain, and it was such an important book, right? Um, Fast forward years later, I had read, 5 or 6 books and watched a bunch of things by Marshall McLuhan, and was just enamored by the way he invites knowledge to your brain. Okay, and it became a subconscious part of everything that I do, from my music to the videos that I direct and the videos that I make, to the lyrics that I write, to my collective of artists that I work with, which is called We Are the Medium. There's no hiding the fact that it's greatly influenced by that man's work. And most recently, I was on, including this class. Sorry, I forgot to say this class specifically is very influenced by those teachings. And the first classes that we had when we discussed the Gutenberg press and the access to information and how media has affected the way we experience the world is very much a soft touch to what McLuhan did for many theorists, authors, artists, and people around the world. And a couple of months ago, I was doing an interview on Q on CBC with Tom Power about my book that I put out, the Text Message Books, which is a poetry book and a comic book and a short story book that I wrote over the course of the last like 5 to 6 years of my life. And I mentioned Marshall McLuhan in the interview, and The Medium is the Message being influential on the design of my book. And I got a tweet and then an amazing email from our guest today, who happens to be Marshall McLuhan's grandson, Andrew McLuhan, who's the director of the McLuhan Institute in Ontario. In an age where our media environment conditions and structures our reality in increasingly potent ways, Understanding Media, which is a book by Marshall, um, is very much presented by Andrew in different places. But Andrew is the grandson of Marshall. He's a Canadian professor at the no noted Canadian professor at the University of Toronto, who was his grandfather. Andrew's father, Eric, was Marshall's oldest son, who worked with Marshall from the mid 60s until he died in 1980. From 1980 until his death in 2018, Eric McLuhan continued the work he began with his father, completing important work such as The Law of Media, The New Science, Media and Formal Cause, Theories of Communication, amongst other solo work. In 2009, Andrew began work documenting and inventorying Marshall McLuhan's annotated library, which is now at the Fisher Rare Book Library at the University of Toronto. And which was the first major McLuhan project and the one he speaks on regularly, most recently at New York University's Exit Through the Bookshop McLuhan Monograffiti. So, needless to say, I got an amazing, amazing message from Andrew, and we've been sending books to each other. And he sent me and my wife an amazing letter about reading text messages and her book, Take Care of Yourself, which you guys are all reading. So, I would like to please give a warm welcome to our guest, Andrew McLuhan. Everybody, put your mics on, send some claps out. Come on now. Clapping is so weird on Zoom.
Yes. Yes.
Andrew.
Hey, everybody.
Nice.
That is the weirdest round of applause I've ever heard.
broken sound, right? So,
right.
Andrew, thank you for joining us. First, I want to say condolences for your dad. I know it's been years, but I can only imagine how difficult that is, and also going through your grandfather's work, bringing you closer and closer to your family. So I want to thank you for the work that you're doing now ahead for all of us and everybody to come.
Thank you so much, Professor Alsalman. That's very kind.
So, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. Man, it's almost hard to know. There's so many things to say, and there's so little time as usual. Being here is a trip. It's really nice to be back at Concordia, if only in, virtually at the moment. All of a sudden, I've got a craving for some Boostan. Like, I could really go for.
Is that me or is that Concordia? Stop fronting, man.
You got your own spice, but no, I want that shish taouk sandwich, man. That's man, I'm kind of craving it now. Yeah, I lived garlic potatoes. Yeah, man, I lived in Montreal for a few years while my partner was in Concordia studying communications. And yeah, it's been a while. I miss it, but I do love. I live in the country in Ontario, a couple hours, just about 4-hour drive from Montreal. Anyway, yeah, your professor mentioned I was upstairs from here. I have my day job. I reupholster and restore old furniture, and I do the McLuhan thing in my spare time. And yeah, I guess it was a couple months ago, I happened to be upstairs sewing, and I turned the radio on, and here I literally hear somebody say Marshall McLuhan, and I'm like, huh? What's that? And it ended up being our friend Yassine Alsalman here. And then Tom Power said something, and that piqued my interest. So I looked up the book and threw something on Twitter, and through the magic of social media, here we are today.
We'll talk about the magic of social media.
Okay, sure.
The first question I want to ask you, just to situate you in the story, is growing up, being surrounded by this. When did you become aware of number one, your grandfather's work and his influence, and what was he like in your childhood? Did you get to spend any time with him?
Yeah, growing up as a grandson, I'm one of 3 grandsons of Marshall McLuhan. I've got 2 male cousins, but I guess I'm the oldest. Growing up as a McLuhan is a weird thing, growing up in any family that has any kind of fame or notoriety or whatever is weird. When you're a kid, you're just a kid and he's your granddad, right? He died when I was just over 2 years old, so I don't have many direct memories. There's some photos of him holding me in his arms and stuff like that, which is really nice, but I don't remember anything directly myself. But he was famous, so you hear about stuff, and as you grow older, you start to understand that your granddad is somebody people knew for whatever reason, and that's kind of weird, but it is what it is. So much is just normal to kids, right? And then as I got older, I started to understand that it was more of a thing, and into my teenage years, people would start to ask me, hey, well, for example, why we're here today, what does the medium is the message mean? And so I got curious. I picked up Understanding Media and I gave it a go, and it went right over my head. Of course,
it's supposed to, though.
Well, yes, exactly. Yeah, it's something that you gain an appreciation of it over time, really. And then later on in my teens, I went into my punk rock phase. And when somebody asked me what the medium as a message meant, I told them to fuck off, you know, and go read a book themselves.
Go read the book.
Right? Why are you asking me? Like, I'm not my grandfather.
Yeah,
You know, identity is a big part of McLuhan's studies.
of course.
And here I am trying to form my own identity, and people keep throwing my family's identity in my face, you know, not very helpful.
Yeah.
Anyway, I kind of grew out of that. And in my 20s, I came back to it and picked up understanding media again. And it made a little more sense, but not too much. It was only really in my 30s that things started to click a little bit. And now I'm 42. And as you mentioned, I did this project. I'm going to get into it a little bit, but my first major project was I took Marshall McLuhan's library. I'm sitting here in Eric McLuhan's library. And I documented and inventoried it, which took me about 1.5 years. And that was a really interesting thing because it was, I got to know Marshall. I got to know my grandfather through his books because he didn't just read his books, but he heavily annotated them. He used his books and his authors kind of as co-authors, and he built a lot of his work off of their work, kind of taking it to places they didn't quite go themselves. So it's a really interesting thing, and this is a whole other topic because, as I mentioned, I do talk a lot about his library, and there's so much. You know, you think you publish a book and the book is out and it's done, but actually that's just the beginning, really. And this is why reading books is very important, and they're highly interactive media, believe it or not. We have a guest on today, my friend, I guess he's not a guest, he's in the background somewhere, who's launching a new technology which integrates AR into physical books to enhance experience. It looks really phenomenal. I'm going to connect you guys.
Yeah, please. I need AR for my books.
Listen, I'm telling you, this is it. Maybe if we have a minute, he'll hop on later. If we
or maybe books in my ARs, so I don't have to read them one way or another.
Well, you know, the lines between these things begin to blur, especially in our age.
Amazing. Yeah, it's true.
But anyway, this is all my own background is I barely graduated high school. I took an extra year because I wasn't interested in schooling. I'm not exactly self-taught, but I didn't attend university formally. I basically started studying with my father on a casual part-time basis as I worked my own jobs, and followed him, helped him out when he gave speaking tours and things, and learned that way. So I'm jealous of you all right now because you have access to so much knowledge and wisdom. And if I could go to university, I would in a heartbeat just for that kind of access.
Yeah, well,
So
you know,
pay
once the time traveling is out or the make you young vaccine is out, then maybe we could think about it again.
Right. Well, I mean, in the meantime, I'm literally sitting here surrounded by 6,000 books. So
show us. Can you show us?
Yeah, I
The
can.
computer?
Coming around.
Oh my God! What? That is not what I expected.
Here's some of the stacks. One of those, I can't really see at the same time. Over here, this is all McLuhan books. This shelf here. There's a lot in here. In non-COVID times, I would invite you all to come down and take a look. And I'm building actually a suite upstairs to have an artist in residency program to allow scholars and researchers to come and use this library because it's a
resource.
It's an incredible resource. My dad treated his library the same way Marshall did. So it's full of his notes and wisdom and anecdotes and really life's blood. So that's a whole thing. But so anyway, that's how I kind of come to this. And I've somehow become a McLuhan specialist, which is a bit of an ironic contradiction in terms, McLuhan being a generalist. I just wanted to mention I'm just about finished Take Care of Yourself, and that's a really wonderful work. In fact, I read your book, Diatribes of a Dying Tribe, first, and I've been into Take Care of Yourself while I'm also dipping in and out of text messages. So you're
also working on your own books, right?
Yeah, you know what? I just got today the proofs. My book of poetry, Written Matter, is coming out next month, probably in about 3 weeks.
Amazing, man. Congrats.
Thank you. I'm really excited about that. I have so many other McLuhan projects that I'm working on, but the fact that I'm able to get out a book of my own poetry first
Yeah,
really
that's amazing.
it's significant. It means a lot to me.
That's amazing.
It just kind of happened. Like so much just kind of happened the last year. It's kind of crazy. But here we are.
So yeah, I wanted to just kind of situate you in your family story before we get into the theories and the ideas that I'd like to discuss with you.
Sure.
One more question I do have for you is you know, when digging through this library, our libraries are you know, as your grandfather said, you know, books are the extension of the. Anybody in class want to chime in? We spoke about this. Because I forgot right now. I'm not looking at my notes, but maybe you could remind me. But books being extensions of our brains and our, you know, our eyes and so many of our different senses, going through these, you know, going through this library that was your dad's and partially your grandfather's. I'm sure you took away so many little things that you may not have known, or but what is the main what is something that really changed you or marked you that came out of like archiving and digging through everything?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, really, the big thing is just the meta fact that the library is a living thing. To be in here surrounded by these books, there's like a metaphysical, like an alchemy that happens. It's really strange. Like the library serves things up. You know, you go and you pick something up and all of a sudden it's 3 hours later and it's like, what the heck did I even come in here for? Right. But it's odd how pertinent things seem to be. And if you follow the McLuhan Institute on Twitter, as you do, it's really a record of the things I'm coming across every day, little things that jump out at me. In fact, I threw up a quote about an hour or two ago, just as I was preparing stuff for here. Like, and it's amazing how relevant it all is to today. Not prophetic, but relevant, which is an important distinction. I mean, so yeah, the main takeaway is how living a library is, and it's hard to really get a sense of that without being in one. But when you walk into a library, especially a library like this, like an annotated library contains physical notes and annotations and little things stuck into between pages, but also contains something essential about a person. It's not just, you know, not to get too out there on this, but it really feels like they left something of themselves behind, and that presence is really comforting. Actually, a lot of the time, it feels like, you know, dad and granddad are here with me. So say hi.
It's amazing. Andrew,
Yeah.
when Medium is the Message hit me, I was maybe, you know, I had already read it, but when it hit me was like 2005, 2006. And it was like the Matrix for me. I know it's like very dramatic. I'm Iraqi and I'm a Gemini, so bear my drama. But um it really started, like I started questioning everything while I was studying comm studies and uh reading into like shots and films and placements of cameras and items and splits between screens and sound design, and like really starting to think about how things are created. I started also thinking about the intention of how we consume them at the end, you know, which is something I didn't think about before. Like how I learned all these hip hop records by heart, but I can't learn a Quran or in its entirety if I don't sit with it as long as I sit with the Mobb Deep album, let's say, right? Like, why is that? And why are things more permeable to the human brain and why are some things not, right? But also how my work was being consumed by people, and it gave me a self-reflection that was very dangerous at the time for you know, I was 23, 24. I was thinking at another level than the people that were around me. So I was like meta, and I was so meta in my stuff and in my videos that like it was a bit ahead of time. Not necessarily ahead of the time, but ahead of time in my generation, right? Which I'm very grateful for because it prepared me for 10 years down the line in my life where I had to deal with this or teach these kind of things and make other people aware of how they were consuming media. So the medium and the medium is the message, or the massage is formative in the thinking of many theorists and creatives in Canada, but worldwide. And I wanted to invite you here to hear from you, and for the students to hear from you what the meaning of that book is, and to give us a brief overview of the book. So I'm going to open the floor to you, and I might interject with questions here and there, but I kind of want you to take the reign, if that's okay.
Cool. Yeah, feel free to jump in anytime. I noticed a flash from the conversation there. Somebody made a comment about how the impact that enjoyment makes in a learning process. And, you know, there's really a McLuhan quote. They say the devil can quote scripture to his purpose. There's a McLuhan quote for any occasion, right? Honestly. And one of the things Marshall said was, anyone who thinks there's a difference between education and entertainment doesn't know the first thing about either. Okay.
Right, that different message.
Right. The medium is the message. 5 words, 5 fairly simple, straight ahead words. But there's it's a poetic statement. It's deep. When you start to peel back the layers, you find more layers. It's incredible. And I've been I started this thing I call the McLuhan Institute just about 3 years ago. Gosh, just about 4 years ago, I guess. In order to continue what my grandfather and what my father started, because I saw a day coming when my dad wouldn't be around, and there was nothing put in place to carry on McLuhan studies in the McLuhan tradition. And it's as hopefully you'll understand by the end of this, it's a unique way of actually approaching media and technology by concentrating on effect, on what do these things do. And there's a big distinction, because a lot of what passes for media studies is content criticism, and it's a different thing. So we're concerned with what these things do. To your assignment that you mentioned at the beginning, do your students call you? What do your students call you?
Man, I've gotten Prof, Teach, Yassine, Narcy, Dog. I've gotten so many things. So you know, they call me what they feel like calling me, unless they cross the line. But call me Yassine.
All right, Yassine. That's funny. Your assignment is cool. What does it mean? Okay, and meaning is one layer of things. Marshall and my father were concerned with effect. What does it do? They wrote this book called Theories of Communication, Exhibit A. And the book opens up with this line: it is a fundamental principle of this book that communication entails change. The sine qua non of communication, therefore, is the matter of effect. If there's no effect, there's no change in the audience, there's no communication. The approach is rhetoric to the core. Theory of communication was this sort of game that Marshall played, where he wanted to understand what any person's given theory of communication was. And it's a formula that runs like this: theory of communication equals audience plus effect. So whenever they encountered an author or an artist, they wanted to answer these 2 questions. Who is their intended audience, and what is their intended effect? And that's an interesting question to ask yourselves when approaching any piece of music, any piece of writing, any author, any artist, anything. Who are they trying to speak to, and what are they trying to do? What are they trying to say? What are they trying to, what a change are they hoping to affect, right? Advertising, for instance, you are their audience, and they're trying to change you into a buyer from a non-buyer, right? Yeah. So
before you go on, I'm gonna have to just for that one. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, you're killing me with the DJ effects. Do I get a gun clap at some point?
You're gonna get a lot of little sound effects, but
Okay.
you know, every time you drop something important, I'm gonna let them know through one of those. So
that's amazing. You know, I have this fantasy of doing a speech where I have a hype man. So, you know,
I'm your hype man. I'm your hype man right now.
Right? Basically. Well, you're the DJ if you're dropping those bam, bam, bam things. But I always thought it'd be funny to have a hype man who would, you know, back up what I'm saying, you know, kind of thing. Be kind of ridiculous. But anyway, yeah. to be serious and not serious, the medium is the message. Okay, so I'm going to get into this by providing a bit of context about who Marshall was, because that understanding who he was and what he was trying to do will really help you understand what the medium is the message is. So it's actually interesting that Marshall, as I said, was interested in effect. He was interested in how things work. He actually started his education career in engineering. He enrolled in engineering at the University of Manitoba. He was raised basically in Winnipeg. But after the first year, he dropped out and he went into English, into a general arts program, and basically never left. But it's interesting that he actually started in engineering, because it shows that he was interested in how things work, how things are made up. And that's something that would continue through his entire career and come into effect with a statement like the medium is the message. How it works is what to take away, what it's doing, effect. Following University of Manitoba, he got his bachelor's there, he got a master's. He won a scholarship to the University of Cambridge. And this was in the Depression. It was a big deal. He actually had to work his passage to England on a cattle boat, which you can imagine is a miserable experience, sharing a ship with cows and being responsible for cleaning up after them across the Atlantic Ocean.
Wow.
Anyway, he gets there with his friend. And Cambridge had a huge impact on him. Well, I guess I don't have the thing I was going to read from, but that's okay. At Cambridge University, he went into English literature. They didn't really recognize his Canadian degrees, so he had to do another bachelor degree and another master's before he could do his PhD there, which is kind of ridiculous. But so the guy's got a lot of degrees. I have none. I'm kind of holding out for an honorary degree. So Yassine, if you can, get that going, I'd be appreciated.
I'll try my best. I'm trying to get one, so maybe we
Are
can
you?
get one.
Well, are you working on a doctorate now?
No, I mean the only closest thing I'd do to a doctorate is try to meet Dr. Dre. I don't think I want to go back into the institute. I want a free one. So, but I'll work for it. I'll definitely work for it.
Right? Listen, I'm putting the work in. I had somebody suggest that I should have gotten a master's or even a doctorate for the work I did on Marshall's library, but whatever. One of these days.
One of these days.
Yeah. Cambridge was really important. And as a thought exercise, I've wondered what would have happened if Marshall went to Oxford University instead of Cambridge, because Oxford was actually his first choice, but he got the scholarship to Cambridge. And Oxford and Cambridge are, big rival. Think Concordia versus McGill or something even, or maybe stronger than that, but rivals, different departments, different focuses of departments. So the English department at Cambridge was a completely different style of literature and criticism than Oxford. Everything Marshall did flows from what he studied at Cambridge, which had a lot to do with this book here, Practical Criticism. This is by I.A. Richards with F.R. Leavis, and they were two of his teachers there. And you could basically sum up Marshall's work by taking the things he learned in practical criticism and applying them instead of literature to technology and culture. Straight up, that's what happened. And it'll blow your mind if you really let that sink in, because you wouldn't have the medium as the message. You wouldn't have any of Marshall's work on technology if you didn't have what he learned in literary criticism, because he basically transferred those skills and techniques from literature to studying culture and technology.
Can I ask you, Andrew, do you know why he had that epiphany? Like, do you know what made him think that from your father? Is there any
what gave him the idea to do it?
Yeah, like what was the moment where he was like, oh my God, what was the media that made him feel that?
Well, it developed a little organically, and you'll see there's a logical progression to it, because one of the things he did was after he left Cambridge, he got his degrees, his doctorate and stuff. He starts to teach in the United States. He taught in Wisconsin for a year and then at St. Louis University. And he found, coming from England, that he didn't understand his students. He was really out of touch with them. So in an effort to understand where his students were coming from, he studied what they were exposed to. He studied American advertising and comics and popular forms of the day, which wasn't something that was really done. This was the beginning of that leap, actually, taking things outside what was classically considered literature and onto more popular forms, which weren't treated seriously. I mean, now you can take courses on The Simpsons, right? But that certainly wasn't done back in the day. Those things were lowbrow and not worth consideration as art forms. Anyway, Marshall already saw the impact that these forms have on people's makeup. And the result of this investigation was a book called The Mechanical Bride, The Folklore of Industrial Man, which was Marshall's first work. That came out in 1951. Just before that, Marshall finally got to Canada. In 1946, he accepted a teaching position at St. Michael's College, University of Toronto. And the rest is, he stayed there for his entire career. Marshall's specialty was modernist poetry. T.S. Eliot, Yeats, Pound, James Joyce especially. He was a Joyce scholar. In fact, if you look through, it's in the medium as the massage, it's everywhere. The number one person that Marshall cites in all his work is James Joyce, and particularly Finnegan's Wake. Very, very important book. And if you've ever looked at it, it's crazy. It's a hot mess. But anyway, St. Michael's College, he was regarded as an expert in modernist poetry. And actually, through his entire career, he taught English right up until the very end. He got into the technology and culture thing kind of as a sideline. In the 1950s, when he got to University of Toronto, somebody there, he met a colleague, Edmund Carpenter. And Carpenter and McLuhan together got a grant to start this seminar in culture. And this is really interesting because they brought together people from all kinds of fields. Carpenter was anthropology, Marshall was literature. They brought in people from history, from economics, from psychology, all to talk about culture. And they got a grant to do this. This is really interdisciplinary studies. And although big deal, back then, there was no such thing as interdisciplinary studies. And a lot of the criticism and a lot of the animosity that Marshall faced within the academy was for the way he went into every field. Back then, I guess it lingers a bit now, but you were expected to be in your field, in your lane, and stay in it. People didn't really welcome you going into their territories. But Marshall realized that if you want to understand technology and culture, you have to cast as wide a net as possible. You have to take an environmental approach. And the medium as the message is an environmental statement, which we will get to. This started something called the Explorations Group in a well-known journal called Explorations, 1953 to 1959, which is kind of legendary. I don't know if you've ever come across it, Yassine.
I haven't. No, I want to get the one with the Arabic writing on the cover. I want to see what that one's about.
Oh yeah, I'll send you a copy. Yeah, the original Explorations journal was very limited run. They sold out instantly, and they're really hard to get now. Luckily, I have a complete copy, a complete collection of them here for reference.
How many issues did they put out? How many
the original Explorations journal was 9 issues. It ended in 59 when the grant money ran out. Marshall picked it up again in the late 60s, mid 60s, and did another 23 smaller issues. And it's that last issue that has the Arabic writing on it that I'll send you, because I have a bunch of copies of that. So I'm happy to. I also have a copy of Understanding Media in Arabic, which is pretty wild.
What?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Please send me a photo of that. I'd love to see
Here,
it.
hold up. Pardon me while I
have an idea that I want to share with you that we'll talk about after class, but
okay.
I'm a big like collector of books and magazines, and my wife and I have a big collection of just media in general, and I love fonts and create. I'm a font stickler.
Oh, nice. Oh, okay. So this isn't the one I'm looking for, but maybe you can decode this for me. What's this?
Oh my god, how you want me to read
Yeah,
all?
there it is.
You have to send me a photo, and I can't read it over here.
Okay. Anyway, as far as I know, this is Understanding Media: The Extensions of Man, 1964, in Arabic.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Keeping it lam yet. It is.
Yeah, cool.
Understanding media in Arabic.
Right? Which is pretty
That's
crazy.
amazing, man.
And hold on a second. Yeah. This is an authorized translation of Understanding Media: The Extensions of Man by Marshall McLuhan, copyright 1964.
Wow.
The wild thing is the publisher of it. It's like published by some US Department of Information or something. It's really bizarre.
Of course it is.
Yeah, right? Speaking of propaganda,
I do. Before we get into like the medium is the message, really about the theory. I have a question. And this is total tangent question that I'm really interested in. What did the government think, the Canadian government, of Marshall's work, and was there ever a moment where they came? I'm sure because he shifted a lot. So did they ever come to him and were like, "Yo, chill," or "We need you," or anything like that?
Okay.
Oh, hold on. Okay, let's go.
Yeah,
Sorry,
that's a good question. Interestingly, because in espionage, a lot of in the early days, we're talking World War I, World War II. A lot of the early secret services were recruited from major universities. These were intellectual people. Harvard, Yale, Cambridge, Oxford. This is where the OSS, the Secret Service, all these people went to find their agents, right? So when Marshall and Corinne, his wife, during World War II, went overseas for their honeymoon to Italy, they were followed. It was assumed that they were agents, British or American or Canadian or whatever agents. It wasn't the case at all. I mean, at all. But interestingly enough, Carpenter was apparently CIA, which is very interesting. And I've heard anecdotally, I don't have evidence myself, but I've heard, and it makes sense, that the FBI, CIA had files on Marshall, and I'm sure they kept tabs because he rolled with an interesting crew, all kinds of people. But look, the dude was not a spy or anything, and he really
no, of course not. No, for me it was more like he's challenging the status quo. So I'm sure at some point they either try to check him or somehow put him try to put him in his place, which you can't do.
Well, I will tell you one thing that's interesting. You know about the Bilderberg meeting?
Yes.
Okay. Bilderberg Group is supposed to be this elite Illuminati people. It's a meeting every year in Switzerland or whatever. And Marshall was invited one year to go. This was 1969. Actually, one of the really cool things I have here is I've got a file of Marshall's speech notes. The way he gave a speech is kind of the way I'm doing now. I make a page of notes and I speak from them. A lot of his notes were really short forms, and he would just write a few pages and then talk from them until he ran out of time. I've got his speech notes from his address to the Bilderberg Group, which is pretty wild.
Wow. Hold on. No. Okay. Keep going, please.
Yeah. So it's like 8 pages or so of notes. And here's the thing. 1969, invited to address the Bilderbergs. Marshall was always testing people because, you got to understand, he said at one point, "I'm the only one who knows what's going on." He had this crazy understanding for the way that things work, for how technologies operate and how they form people, and he could read them like you read a book. Okay, it was uncanny, and I don't know anybody else in the world then or since or before that could do that. But he could do it just like this. Anyway, he was always testing people to see how much they understood, and he figured that this was his chance to meet his peers, right? This is supposed to be the elite of the world, the people that run things. Yeah, we don't know who discovered water, but we know it wasn't a fish. That'll come up. So Marshall was excited, and he threw everything he had at them, right? He was very disappointed to find out that they didn't have a clue what they were doing, that these so-called elite who were controlling the strings of countries, nations, and the world were as clueless as everybody else as to the effects of technologies. Straight up. Weird. Anyway.
It's because they're ignorant.
Yeah. Ignorant. That was 1969. So, Marshall, you can imagine he felt a little bit lonely. I'm the only one who knows what's going on is very arrogant, but it's also very lonely, if you think about it. Yeah, so the medium's a message. This brings us into the 50s. I've been studying the medium is the message for a few years now because it's such a touch point. When you think about Marshall McLuhan, you inevitably think about a few things. You'll think about the medium is the message, or the global village, or maybe the medium is the massage. And you'll think about Annie Hall in Marshall's famous cameo in Woody Allen's movie, You Know Nothing of My Work. So the medium is the message is something I've really latched on to because everybody has heard it. Very few people understand it. So it's a really good touch point. And I honestly believe that if we all understood what it meant, it would be a completely different world. It's a really powerful thing to embody. So what I decided to do was to find out when the first time Marshall ever said it was. A lot of people assume that it comes from Understanding Media in 1964, but that's not the case. He said it a lot of times earlier. In fact, there's this article titled The Medium is the Message from 1960, 4 years before. But he actually said it even earlier than that. And where he got the inspiration from it is a fun little game. I've kind of traced it to something a man called Kenneth Boulding said. But the most fun place I've been able to trace it is to a satellite named Sputnik. And this is kind of weird, but and Marshall didn't even know it at the time. It was only later he figured it out. He wrote this article. This is from 1973. And the article's called "At the Moment of Sputnik, the Planet Became a Global Theater in which there are no spectators, but only actors," which is a really long article title, but there you go. And in that,
we landed on Mars today. I wonder how he'd feel about that.
Right? Well, Mars, Marshall. Yeah. Yeah. Listen, us McLuhans are so steeped in Joyce. Everything has multiple layers. It's all
like Jay-Z. You guys are the monster of the double entendre.
Right? Triple, quadruple.
Yeah.
Entendre.
Quintuple.
Right. It's all pun and games from here on in, Yassine. Yeah. I like how you open that up. You could have been anywhere tonight, but you're here.
Yeah, you have no choice.
Jay-Z. Yeah, nice. Marshall opens up his this article with, "Perhaps the largest conceivable revolution in information occurred on October 17th, 1957, when Sputnik created a new environment for the planet. For the first time, the natural world was completely enclosed in a man-made container. At the moment that the Earth went inside this new artifact, nature ended and ecology was born. Ecological thinking became inevitable as soon as the planet moved up into the status of a work of art." Ecological thinking. Shortly thereafter, the environmental movement was born with Rachel Carson and Silent Spring, which actually came out the same year as the Gutenberg Galaxy, interestingly enough. So October 17th, 1957, Sputnik goes up. May 6th or so, 1958, Marshall tells an audience that the medium is the message. Just about 6 months later, which is an ecological statement. It's very interesting. I managed to track it down to that, and I found a transcript. I live in hope that there's a recording of it somewhere, because if there's a transcript, there was a recording, right? But I haven't found the recording, but the transcript reads like this. The media are the messages. They are not conveyor belts of messages. In the long run, it is radio that is the message and not what a radio program content happens to be at any given day or year. In the long run, it's photography that is the meaning and the message, not the picture of somebody or something. Form, not content. I read that. The media are the messages. And I'm like, oh, so close, so close. But he didn't say it. One page later. Print, by permitting people to read at high speed and above all to read alone and silently, developed a totally new set of mental operations. What I mentioned earlier becomes very relevant here. The medium is the message. The medium of print is the message more than any individual writer could say. So by extension, it's great that we're all here, and I can't believe there's 160 people in this class, but that's cool. You know, this class in the long run doesn't mean very much, but Zoom as a form, as a whole, has made all the difference in the last year. Can you imagine what the last year would be like without Zoom or something like it, you know? Complete change, right?
Yeah, I think also the way that the forms of assignments and the forms of work that are coming out of this kind of function, and like, you know, we use Discord to all talk to each other, and it's a
Okay.
total different version of connectivity than what it was before, you know?
Yeah. Exactly. So that's 1958, which is wild. 58. Around that time, Marshall got a grant. Actually, he was commissioned by an outfit in Washington, D.C. called the National Association of Educational Broadcasters. He was commissioned to develop a syllabus and write a report for understanding media for high school students, 1958. He worked on it over the next 2 years and published it, well, handed it in. It's called the Report on the Project in Understanding New Media. Over the next 4 years, he would take that report and kind of cut it up and blow it apart and put it back together. And in 1964, it was published as Understanding Media, The Extensions of Man.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really interesting to go back and look at that report. If you get, this is the Ginkgo Press 2003 edition of Understanding Media. And it includes, this is a great edition of the book to get if you're looking for a copy, because it has the original and the second introduction that Marshall wrote for the book. Plus it has some extra material in the appendix pulled from the project, the report on the project in Understanding New Media. Unfortunately, it doesn't publish the whole report. Oh, somebody in the comment. Okay, this gets trotted a lot. We shape our tools and thereafter they shape us. I usually save that quote for the end of class. That was, Marshall didn't say that. That was actually John Culkin, who wrote an article on Marshall called A Schoolman's Guide to Marshall McLuhan. And in that he comes up with the, we don't know who discovered water, but we know it wasn't a fish. And also this other quote, we shape our tools and thereafter they shape us. That quote by Culkin is actually paraphrasing Winston Churchill, who said we shape our buildings and thereafter our buildings shape us. So he took that, paraphrased it to encapsulate Marshall, which it does very well. We shape our tools and thereafter they shape us. Edmund Carpenter said it another way, we become what we behold. Very, very similar sentiments. So understanding media, I'll just refer back to this for a second. The medium is the message. This is a pretty meaty little article, and it opens like this. It is not easy to convince a literary man that an interest in the psychodynamics of the printed form of codification of information is anything but malice toward literature. Marshall encountered this a lot. People assumed that he was an enemy of the book, which wasn't the case. He was a literature professor and books were his life. But people have this thing that if you talk about it, you're in favor of it. And he talked about the new media, so he must be the enemy of the book, and not the case. But in Understanding Media, the opening chapter is The Medium is the Message. And it's a 20+ page elucidation of what that actually means. Yassine, I can send you these pages. I've assembled a document of quotes on The Medium is the Message, and if people want them after, I can send you to them.
Yeah, just email it to me. I'll add it to our Moodle page.
Oh. To your what?
Yeah, I know, right? I'm gonna add it to my Moodle. Yeah, Moodle is like our portal that they use at Concordia, which isn't the greatest thing in the world. But,
Really?
But yeah, I mean.
Nice.
All right, please keep going.
The Medium is the Message. The first chapter of Understanding Media opens like this. And whenever I'm explaining things of Marshall's, I like to do it in using his words because, you know, secondhand, third hand, it gets watered down, and it's better that you embody it yourself. And the great thing about The Medium is the Message is he first said it in 1958. He probably last said it in 1979 before he had a stroke, which rendered him unable to speak. Wow. In that time span, he said it hundreds of times in hundreds of different ways. And when you read a few of them, you start to get a sense of what he's talking about. So Understanding Media, the first chapter opens like this. In a culture like ours, now remember this is 1964, in a culture like ours, long accustomed to splitting and dividing things as a means of control, he's talking about the alphabet, it is sometimes a bit of a shock to be reminded that in operational and practical fact, the medium is the message. Operational and practical. That is merely to say that the personal and social consequences of any medium, that is, of any extension of ourselves, he's giving a definition here, result from the new scale that is introduced into our affairs by each new extension of ourselves or by any new technology. This is a really meaty sentence. And this is why this book is more like a book of poetry. Yassine read my little bio there from a course that I taught last year on Understanding Media. And I taught 36 hours, 12 classes on just the first 7 chapters of Understanding Media.
Wow.
It's incredible once you start to look into it.
So it's so dense. Like he puts it in not in simple terms, but it's so you can unfold every sentence, you know?
Yep. Yeah, like here's my annotation. So actually, this was really cool. What I did for teaching it is I replicated what my grandfather and what my father did when they're going through books. Is they make notes in the margins. So basically, what I did with my students was I pulled out all the little bits and pieces and references and allusions that Marshall makes, and I gave the backstories to them all. It was a really cool thing. So just to go over like this for a second, in a culture like ours, long accustomed to splitting and dividing things as a means of control, that refers to Gutenberg, to the alphabet and the printing press. It is sometimes a bit of a shock, and here he's evoking electricity and the shock. In operational and practical fact, the medium is the message. So now he says, this is merely to say that the personal and social consequences, and this is what he was concerned with. He was concerned with, his theory of media, if you want to give it, is that our technologies affect us in these 2 major categories, personally and socially. The personal consequences are the effective technologies on our brains, how they literally rewire our neural pathways, and the effects on our senses. When you affect one sense, you affect all your senses. So there's an equilibrium among the senses. And this this forms so much of who we are. It informs how we approach everything. It informs our tastes, what kind of music we like. This explains things like the generation gap and why hip hop sounds great to me and not so great to my parents, because my parents are tuned a different way. Their senses are tuned a different way. Somebody recently posted this thing about in China at McDonald's, they have this burger that's spam and crushed Oreos. And people are like, "Ugh, gross." But obviously, in a different culture, it's great. And a lot of this has to do with their tastes. And their tastes are an effect of their sensorial makeup, right? This is largely formed by our technologies, by the media, which we grow up around, this environment, this soup of technology that we all live in. That's the personal consequences. Socially, the consequences are, so how it affects us, and then how that changes how we interact with each other. Okay, and what that means, how the car affected cities by allowing people to live outside the city and in the suburb and then travel into the city. How Zoom has allowed the world to carry on not quite as normal, but in some kind of semblance of it. We're able to have classes and this kind of interaction. The way that now imagine that tomorrow the internet or Zoom goes down, right? And it would be chaos. And that tells you how deep society has reorganized around these technologies. They quickly become indispensable. And that is the message.
Yeah, I think a telltale example of that is when Instagram or Facebook or Twitter is down, you immediately get the hashtag Instagram down, and it becomes like this problem that we all have, Yeah. Yeah.
Well, how do you feel if you drop your phone in the toilet?
Yeah.
Right? I do this class on figure and ground, which is a lot of fun, and I do it for students in grade 5 and 6 up to university and beyond. And it's a lot of fun to do it with the kids, because I talk to them. We get basically to this point, and I say, we've kind of discussed on how important the smartphone is to their lives, right? How everything they do is organized around the smartphone. When they wake up in the morning, they check their phone. It wakes them up, even when they're on the playground, they're texting or checking whatever. When they want to know what the weather's like, they don't stick out their arm, they look at their phone, right? If they have to add 10 and 10, they look at their phone. It's all their phone, their phone, their phone, their phone. So I say, now imagine you wake up tomorrow and your phone doesn't work anymore and it's never going to work again. And they're like, because look, a 10-year-old can't wrap their mind around that. It's everything that they know. And that's why the medium is the message. That's why the effect and the reorganization, the personal and social consequences are what is most of, taking note than anything that we're using it for on a day-to-day basis, right? That's the thrust of, the medium is the message, not the content. In fact, the other half of that statement is the user is content, because the user is always the content of their environment. So that's just the opening sentence of Understanding Media. Of the medium is the message. He carries on. What we are considering here, however, are the psychic and social consequences of the designs or patterns as they amplify or accelerate existing processes. For the message of any medium is the change of scale or pace or pattern that it introduces into human affairs. Like a book of poems, you can't read it from cover to cover. You can't, it's not like a novel that you get absorbed into a narrative. You follow the plot line and you can read it from start to finish and expect to ingest it all. A book like this really demands that you take your time and consider things. And a lot of people, maybe especially today, aren't really prepared to encounter a text like that. It's against their expectations. That's for sure. It continues on. The electric light is pure information. It is a medium without a message, as it were, unless it is used to spell out some verbal add or name. This fact, characteristic of all media, means that the content of any medium is always another medium. A lot of the problem people get into with the medium is the message is this word medium, and they bring their definition of it to the game when Marshall's not talking about the device, but he's talking about the effect. And he spells it out pretty clearly here that the message is change. For example, whether the electric light is being used for brain surgery or night baseball is a matter of indifference. It could be argued that these activities are in some way the content of the electric light, since they could not exist without the electric light. This fact merely underlines the point that the medium is the message, because it is the medium that shapes and controls the scale and form of human association and action. The content or uses of such media are as diverse as they are ineffectual in shaping the form of human association. Indeed, it is only too typical that the content of any medium blinds us to the character of the medium. Anyway, he goes on and on and on about this, 20 pages worth, which is all very entertaining. But you've gotten the main highlights of it. The first thing is this definition of extension, amplification. In fact, the title of the book is Understanding Media, the Extensions of Man. He's giving you his definition of what a medium is. He takes a little bit of a turn. I call this his environmental turn. And it happens right around 1964, which is interesting, where he opens up his definition and starts using the word environment a lot more explicitly. Here it is. It is now perfectly plain to me that all media are environments. All media have the effects that geographers and biologists have associated with environments in the past. The medium is the message because the environment transforms our perceptions, governing the areas of attention and neglect alike. And that leads to that statement, we don't know who discovered water, but we know it wasn't a fish, because it's the nature of environments to be relatively invisible. You don't notice the air, but it permeates everything. Well, same with the water. The fish only knows the water when it's pulled out of it. We only, the kids only notice the effect of the smartphone when you take it out of the equation. That's when it becomes apparent just how integral it is. They are like that fish pulled out of water who realize that they can't breathe for the first time. It's an interesting thing. A little earlier, Marshall said, the meaning and effect of a medium is the sum total of all its impact upon psyche in society. That's a good, really succinct one. That's from a letter in 1964. Again, actually, this is a good one. It is the medium that is the message because the medium creates an environment that is as indelible as it is lethal. That's from Notes on Burroughs. Marshall wrote an article about William Burroughs, which is a really good read, actually, if anybody's interested in Burroughs. Yeah, again, with the environmental. In the introduction to the second edition of Understanding Media, just a couple years later, Marshall writes, the section on the medium is the message can perhaps be clarified by pointing out that any technology gradually creates a totally new human environment. Environments are not passive wrappings, but active processes.
Sounds like my bars. No passive wrapping.
Heyo. The medium is the message means, in terms of the electronic age, that a totally new environment has been created. The content of this new environment is the old mechanized environment of the industrial age. The new environment reprocesses the old one as radically as TV is reprocessing the film. This is 1968. For the content of TV is the movie. TV is environmental and imperceptible like all environments. We are aware only of the content of the old environment. Each new technology creates an environment that is itself regarded as corrupt and degrading, yet the new one turns its predecessor into an art form.
You know, Andrew, if you don't mind me cutting you off,
Yeah, go ahead.
we don't have much time. We have about like 25 minutes left, but
Okay.
I wanted to just chime in and say this. Like, I always wonder what your grandfather would have thought of the internet and the way we consume all types of content through, and I use the word consume for a reason, through one specific like channel. You know, it's not one medium, but it's really like, what would he think of YouTube? What would he think of TikTok? You know, like it's such a like dilution of this, not dilution, but like almost a simplification of where he was looking at TVs and radio. And you know, like he was way ahead of his time to the point
Well,
where you can attribute it to these spaces, you know?
sure. And he saw it coming. So we've been, the history of technology is the history of taking pieces of ourselves and putting it outside of us here and there to do other things. We're gradually bringing them all together into one place. And he said in Understanding Media that we're rapidly approaching the final, was it the final phase of the extensions of man, the simulation of consciousness.
Wow.
This is what he felt the end game was. He says that like on the first page of the introduction. You can read that maybe as Internet of Things. You can read that maybe as the singularity, when technology becomes self-aware. You know, that's what consciousness is, I think, self-awareness.
Which I think is coming in the next couple of years. They're preparing us, you know?
I mean, there's a good chance it's here, you know, which is the frightening thing. The
Yeah.
thing that freaks me out and sometimes makes me lose a bit of sleep is, consider that Marshall said, I'm very careful to only predict things which have already happened. Okay, now let that sink in for a second. When we read what he's talking about in the 60s and say, oh my God, he's describing today, he was describing his present. Okay, so what aren't we seeing now? Like,
message,
right?
Wow.
Like it's kind of spooky stuff when you really think about it. But oddly enough, Marshall was hopeful. You know, this was his overwhelming. He did say tongue-in-cheek that our only hope is apocalypse, but I think his entire work was characterized as hope because he spent his entire career trying to understand the way these things work so that, as he said, we can think things out before we put them out. This idea of what he called media ecology is that we don't have to suffer the side effects, that we can make smarter design choices and get ahead of the effects. And this was the whole point. He felt that we were in a unique position to be able to do this because of the changes in scale and pace. Things happen so fast today that we don't have time to adjust. And that's where we have the opportunity to understand and to recognize patterns. Somebody said, if they only raised the bathwater temperature by 0.5 degree an hour, we wouldn't know when to scream. That's the thing is you become accustomed to your environment and then it becomes invisible. But we can notice our environment because we don't have time to get accustomed to it. Tomorrow a new medium comes along, you know, ready or not, and we're not ready. We don't have time to adjust. And our burnt nervous system is testament to that. You know, we're all, burnout is life, right? We're all burnt out. And there are reasons for that, very clear reasons, I think.
Yeah, I've been thinking more than ever now. There was an era in my life where I didn't have smartphones, obviously, and there was even an era in my life where I didn't have internet, right? So I've been thinking a lot about how, as a whole, the consciousness of humanity and how it's been affected by the use of these platforms for over a decade now. Like I would assume, Wi-Fi has been going for a bit over a decade now, and what that has done to our brains and what it'll do in the long run. Because we see photos of our way back ancestors, and they even physically look different because of their environment, right? Um, the things they ate, the way the planet was functioning, the architecture around them, the pollution around them. And then you come now to this point and you wonder what the next, what the next 10, 20 years is going to be like.
Well, listen, man, we tend to be concerned with, does it work? Is the internet on? And less concerned with what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Consider that recently Elon Musk launched another 109 satellites into space, which it's his plan with Starlink to encapsulate the globe, not just with one satellite encapsulating the Earth, but a network of satellites locking down the Earth into a giant Wi-Fi toaster, or whatever the analogy you want to use is. But what's the effect of that going to be?
Let alone Neuralink. Let alone Neuralink.
Yeah. Oh, somebody hates Elon Musk. I don't think he cares if we hate him.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, hating. This is another point about Marshall, is that he made very concerted efforts not to give opinions on things. And if you pay attention to his work, nothing that he's said here is for or against any technology. That gets in the way of understanding the nature of a thing. Look, when you decide that you hate Elon Musk, you're resigning yourself to not understanding much more about. You don't need to. You've decided that you hate the guy, or you've decided that the smartphone is good, or you've decided that the smartphone is evil, and it becomes very difficult to be objective, right? Look, if a surgeon got really emotionally involved in his operation, you don't want a surgeon who's getting emotionally involved. You want somebody who's detached, and value judgments make it very difficult to be detached from things. We live in a society that makes it very difficult to be detached from things when everything we're prompted by on social media is what's on your mind. What do you think? What's your opinion? Give an opinion. What do you think about it? Value, and this kind of precludes objectivity. Anyway, I think we've probably given enough food for thought on the medium is the message.
Yeah, I kind of want to open the floor up to any students that have particular questions. My question would be this: it's very hard to gauge somebody's legacy or be aware of your own legacy when you are alive. And I was wondering, was your grandfather and then subsequently your father aware of that legacy, which you've developed that awareness, as you said, when you went through everything at home and built the institute? What was your impetus for like what is your goal with the institute, number one? And number two, was your grandfather aware of the institution that he was creating?
Yes, he was. I think he understood that he would pass away long before people got it. One reason I'm hopeful is because I can spend an hour or even less talking with a group of people, and I can get across what the medium is the message means in 2021. In 1958, in 1960, in 1964, people thought he was crazy. What do you mean the medium is the message? The message is the message. What do you? People literally thought he was crazy. I have a scrapbook that my grandmother collected of like reviews and stuff of understanding media, and they're almost comical. People are like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. It's a flash in the pan. Nobody's going to know who he was in 1 year, you know, let alone whatever. But part of the reason that the work is timeless is because it's based on practicality, and it's based on analysis of effects, not opinions, right? Opinions are fashionable, they change. Tools are timeless. And this was Marshall's, like I said at the beginning, in practical fact. He was interested in the practical, understanding media. And why I chose the first 7 chapters in the course I taught was that understanding media is a collection of tools. And I think what we need today are tools for getting us out of our situations. One, Marshall used like to use metaphor a lot. In fact, his whole work is based on metaphor, and not surprisingly, because he was a literary guy.
And an MC, and a very powerful MC, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, no, for real. A poet of the highest order,
Yes.
for sure. Before I get to that, just to what you said, he was very intentional. He understood how things work, and he adapted himself to every situation. If you look at interviews of him online, look at a few different ones and pay attention to how he behaves, and you'll notice he behaves differently in different situations, because he read the grammar of these situations, the people and the circumstance, and changed himself accordingly. The Marshall McLuhan you'll see in print is different from the Marshall McLuhan you'll hear on radio or see on a television program, with good reason. He was very intentional. And this isn't, as a little sidebar, his mother, Elsie Hall McLuhan, was an elocutionist. Has anybody ever heard that word?
No.
No. She was an elocutionist. She was quite well known in Canada and in the States for a time. Somebody, yes, has heard. Elocutionist comes actually from the study of rhetoric, elocutio, which is one of the 5 figures of rhetoric, delivery. And what an elocutionist was, what she did, oh, Sabir's got it, awesome. She was essentially a performer, and she would give one-woman shows. She would take a play and she would act all the parts. So she would, you know, rent out a hall or would go on a stage and give performances. She would read dramatic monologues and act out plays and things like that. She was a performer. And Marshall learned a lot from her. He was a performer. You called him an artist, Yassine, and he very much was, very intentionally an artist.
For sure.
A lot of what he did was just messing with people. You know,
what people would call trolling nowadays.
Yeah, no, he was trolling, but he was like a next level troll. He really was. If you want to see,
he was like he was meta trolling. He was flying over their heads while trolling them.
Oh yeah, he could run linguistic circles around anybody. Check out the debate between Marshall McLuhan and Norman Mailer, which you can find online, and it's amazing to watch this guy work. He was quick, like quick-witted and fast. There's so much more to say, but the one thing I wanted to mention there was about this hope and how he had hope for the future. Edgar Allan Poe, which was a writer he admired a lot, had a story called A Descent into the Maelstrom, and it's worth reading. And in the story, there's a sailor and his brother, and they're out fishing, and where they live in the ocean, there's this giant vortex in the water, this maelstrom, and everybody knows about it, and you stay away from it and you're cool. But anyway, they were out fishing and they got a little bit too close to it, and before they knew it, they're sucked into the maelstrom. And this is this gigantic thing. So they get sucked in. His brother loses his shit and he jumps overboard. But the protagonist in the story, the sailor, keeps his cool. And the ship is going around and around and down and down and down, and it's taking forever. And he, being the kind of guy he is, he's paying attention to what's going on, and he notices that certain objects, instead of going down, are going up against the current of the maelstrom and are getting out. And he pays attention to this, and he straps himself to something in the boat, and he times it just right, and he jumps overboard into the vortex to his safety. He's washed ashore. Marshall used this as an analogy to how we can escape our own vortex and maelstrom of technology. How by studying the patterns and the actions of our technologies, we can find ways out, how we can, better our own ingenuity, technologically speaking.
Amazing. I'd like to open the floor up to the students, see if anybody has any questions. We have about 12 minutes left. Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I'm grateful to be able to see you face to face, even though through this medium. And I look forward to building more and more with you and the institute that you have established. I
Yeah,
think
for sure. My
much
pleasure.
work to do.
My only regret is that I wanted to hit up the cat filter thing, but I'm not a cat. I figured that would make me seem really old if I were to do that. So I already feel old enough.
Anybody have any questions they would like to ask Andrew? Say it now or forever hold your peace. Yes, somebody put. Anis, go ahead.
Hey, hey, sir. Thank you. Thank you for this session. Very, very intuitive, and there's clearly a lot of thought in everything you presented here today. And I'm curious to know what do you consider your medium? Because as I understand it, we all have this core to us. I would say you probably your scene is around the music, around hip hop, and we build around this core, right? And this is why certain memories are deeper connected to us than others behind that. And I'm curious, so what's your center?
Yeah. Thank you, Anis. Thank you, everybody, for paying attention to me for this last however long. I honestly could go on and on and on. I was raised. Listen, I read your teacher's book, Diatribes of a Dying Tribe, and this is the thing about the world that we live in. Culture is global, right? Hip hop culture is spoken about as the culture, and for a reason, because it's global. I grew up in Toronto in the 80s, in the 90s, and I'll repeat what Yassine said. Enter the Wu-Tang changed my life. Like me and my friends, it was all about hip hop and Wu-Tang, and whatever. I'm a white boy from Toronto. It doesn't matter. It's one world, right? It's one culture. And that's a powerful and telling thing. But I'm a bit of a strange case because even though, I grew up in this culture and, with television and stuff, my father being the guy he was very intentional on the kinds of things we were exposed to. There were rules in our house. If you wanted to watch TV, you had to read a book first, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm using that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's straight up. And at one point he even, the TV was in a cabinet. He put a door and a lock on it to enforce the rule. If you want to watch a program, half hour of TV, half hour of a book. That was the deal. And I have two kids. They're about to turn 7 and 5. And
that's exactly my children's age.
I know, man. I know. We're basically the same person, Yassine. Right. But I've got boys and you've got girls, right?
I got a boy and a girl, yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Anyway. Luckily, my eldest, Ezra, is all about reading. So that's fine. My youngest, Virgil, is also really getting into it too. So that's great. I'll continue to foster it because, again, the medium is the message, the psychic and social consequences or effects, right? We become what we behold. Book in, book out. Internet in, internet out, right? And that's simplistic. Things are a little more complicated than that. And the other thing is you can't opt out. It to a certain extent. Look, if I didn't have a smartphone, I still live in a culture that's ruled by the smartphone. there's a great debate, another debate between Marshall McLuhan, W.H. Auden, and Buckminster Fuller about television. And Auden, who is a playwright, he wrote plays, I believe, said, I don't have a television and I wouldn't dream of having a television. And Marshall says, well, you merely suffer the consequences without enjoying any of the benefits, right? Because look, we're in this soup and you might as well make the most of it, right? Because getting angry about it and smashing the machines isn't going to fix anything, right? So look, I'm pretty deep into my smartphone. I'm not going to lie. My wife bugs me about it and she thinks, you're a McLuhan. Like, what are you doing? But I gotta spread the message somehow. So the McLuhan Institute's on Twitter, it's on Instagram, it's on Facebook. I have my YouTube page, and these are all different ways. If you follow each of those channels, you'll find different things because I use them very differently. On Twitter, Marshall said the future of the book is the blurb. Okay, Twitter is an embodiment of that. Twitter lends itself to these concise little things. Marshall, being a master of the aphorism, is perfect Twitter material. So it's really easy for me to throw out great little quotes on Twitter, because this is how Marshall wrote and how he spoke, even in these little Twitter kind of sound bites, which is great. On the Instagram for the McLuhan Institute, I post mainly just images of stuff. So I inherited, me and my wife sold our house and bought this property from my mom last year, which has my dad's, this is a 2-story barn that has like the 6,000 volume library plus all these artifacts from my dad and granddad's life. And I document the things that I come across. You'll notice I have a very rich background, a lot of stuff going on. So I used Instagram for a lot of images and stuff because it's obviously a sort of pictorial image-based thing. YouTube, obviously videos and stuff. I even have a podcast now. I'm doing all the socials. I'm messing with Clubhouse, whatever.
Amazing. It can be overwhelming, man.
Oh yeah. Listen, I met this guy. I don't know if he's still here. Poet. What is Clubhouse? Somebody says. Listen.
Go
the podcast
Clubhouse. You'll find out it's a bunch of people just yapping while feds are listening to them.
It's a podcast that doesn't end. Essentially, it's a hole. It's a deep hole for your ear.
Somebody asked, "What's your podcast?"
The podcast is called The Massage. It's on Apple and whatever else. I'm lucky to have an assistant. This guy Steven. Steven, I love you, man. Look, the dude sent me an email last year and he was like, "I want to help you." And he sorts out a lot of the tech stuff for me. He's the reason I have a podcast and an email list and all this stuff. The podcast has a lot of McLuhan related audio, and I've just started. The first one should launch this week, actually. I just started a conversation, a proper podcast, a series of conversations on culture and technology. I'm hoping to talk to Yassine and his wonderful wife, Sundus.
We will be honored.
Yeah, great. And look, it's really it's unpretentious and just a conversation with people about culture and technology and how we're all living. So we have to use the tools that are at our disposal to get our stuff out there. I brought up this guy I just actually met. His name's Poet de Medici, and this guy's developing this technology that blends, as I said, AR with physical books. And listen, I think there's so much potential with this thing. Anyway, because of him, I've downloaded like 3 new apps today. And like, I'm texting him, we're instant messaging on Instagram, LinkedIn, and like whatever, workplace, all this stuff. It's heady, right? It's so much coming at us so fast. And what do you do? Balance is important. So I'm fortunate in that I'm surrounded by these 6,000 or whatever books, especially in a time like this when you can't go to the library. I'm really lucky. I have more than a lifetime's worth of reading to do. So I kind of follow what my dad put me onto early on, which is, we know that these technologies shape our senses. Most of it happens when we're kids. It kind of sets us up for our life, but it's an ongoing thing. We're constantly being rewired by these technologies. And how do you want to be wired? For me, I want the kind of effects that literacy gave us. Detachment, objectivity, reason. These are things which come from involving ourselves with print. For example, for this class, I made 3 pages of notes, pen and paper. I start half of my days every week sitting at this desk writing a poem. And it doesn't have to be, is it good or is it bad? The medium is the message. What matters is that I'm taking a pen, I'm taking a piece of paper, and that's the speed I'm working at. Okay. It's forcing my mind to work at that speed. Typewriters are great. Typewriters, computers, keyboards, right, are great. I can get out 80 words a minute. That's fabulous. But the quality of those 80 words is much different than the 80 words I'm putting down pen on paper.
You know what's crazy? You say that. I've been in the studio for a couple of weeks now working on music, and I have 3 different processes of writing. One is typing on my laptop, and that's usually the quickest. Then there's writing things by hand, and then there's using my brain as the paper, like, and not writing. And they all give such a different expression of myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are 3 major forms of the word. There's the word in the mind, there's the spoken word, and there's the written word, and very different things. Marshall changed his style from physically writing books, manuscript by hand, to dictation. He worked in his later years with co-authors, because what he would do is the co-author would sit down and take notes while Marshall spouted off. Then the co-author would go off and write the stuff up, and Marshall would put a stamp on it or say, change this or whatever. As an experiment, try experimenting with the 3 forms. Okay. I've tried this, and it's very difficult, but consider that there was a time, and it wasn't even that long ago, when we didn't write at all, when the main transmission of information in history happened orally from mouth to ear. Okay. Try writing a poem in your mind. See how far you can get. It's an interesting exercise.
Yeah, I wrote a 16 bar yesterday that way.
Yeah. Really?
Yeah.
16 just on.
It took a minute because I'm recording it at the same time. So
no, this is different.
Yeah.
This is different. I'm talking about holding it in your mind.
Yeah. Before,
don't write it down till later.
The whole poem. Yeah.
That's the first exercise. The second exercise is dictation. Okay. And that's another skill that you can develop, freestyle, and then a third and a fourth would be write something by hand and then type something, and see what the quality is of these 4 different things.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Andrew, we have reached our cutoff point. I want to thank you. I want to thank you so much for being a part of our semester. It's going to be so integral to the way they think. If anybody in class does want to go get Marshall McLuhan's books, please visit the McLuhan Institute for any exclusive drops, but also it's available, readily available on all your retailers that sell books as well. Certain ones of the books anyway. Andrew, any last words before we play our going out music?
I mean, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the trust and the opportunity to talk to you all. And look, just take care of each other and take care of yourself, right? Love.
God bless, bro. Thank you, everybody. I'll see you all next week. Peace.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Andrew, I'll text you. Thank you. See you all next week. Expect an email from me about your take-home exams. Wash your hands. Stay far away from people you don't know, don't live with you. Be safe. I'll see you next year.
Bye.